trying to push things this year. This is our 5th luncheon in the Women in Academia series, sponsored by ExxonMobil. So if you ever know anyone from there, thank them. They give SWE a lot of money, and they give us money for things like this. If you, at any point, need to leave, it's not a problem. Just head through the back. Really, it's okay if you have to leave. Your grad students, we understand. Additionally, at the end of this, you will receive a little survey in the body of an email. It's like 5 questions. Please make sure you fill it out. That feedback ensures that when we apply for future grants, we get it. So please fill out the survey, and then I'm going to hand it over to our guest speaker. I'll let her introduce herself. She'll do a better job than I would.
Hi, I'm going to sit here for a second. My name is Lena Ting. I'm a faculty member in biomedical engineering here. And it's a joint department with Emory and Georgia Tech, so I actually have appointments in lots of departments. I started my undergrad as a mechanical engineer at Berkeley. Just a little bit. I took a year off to do some research and travel. I went to graduate school in mechanical engineering at Stanford in biomechanics, and then I did 2 postdocs. One for a year in France in neurophysiology, and then in neuroscience in Portland, Oregon, Oregon Health and Science University, before I came here to the joint Georgia Tech biomedical engineering program, that was 12 years ago. So I've been here for a while, and I wanted to maybe get a sense of who's in the room, because I think when I was in the middle of grad school, I really could not have seen what my path was necessarily, and the whole process of where I ended up, even though I was very strongly wanting to pursue an academic position. So I guess, how many of you are like getting ready to graduate and really actually about to do this? Okay, a few. And then who's sort of just starting out and wants to see what lies ahead. Okay, and then I'm assuming everyone's in that middle undetermined, I don't know how long it's going to be kind of place. Okay, so we have a different crowd, and so there's different things for you to know. I want to say that all this, I'm just going to present one of the PowerPoints that I have that is, okay, that's on my website. So I have, you just Google me and then go to my lab. There's a part called Unsolicited Advice, and it's basically little presentations I put together when I started having lots of conversations with people about the same thing. And so, and I haven't done one in a long time, so this is been up there for a while, and actually even to have some good results. There's one about research, which is what I was going to talk about now, about writing a research statement, and then actually you get an interview, what are you supposed to do. This comprehensive interview guide I didn't write, but it came from my advisor. It's very dated, but it'll talk about access to a Xerox machine. So you can replace that with like internet, computer, but all of the sort of ideas of what you're trying to get out of interviewing are still there. And then I had one that I wrote early in my career about running a successful lab meeting that wasn't necessarily in the model of anything that I had experienced as a graduate student or postdoc, where I run a very interdisciplinary collaborative lab, and so we don't all have the same knowledge base, and when we communicate well and be nice to each other, and not feel like they're all hanging out on their own. So part of it is like just interested in developing a very cohesive and collaborative lab group, which bears lots of different fruits in the research, and some people might say it's a more feminine style of leadership. But I think it works generally across the board too, especially as we get into the age of team research. So, and then there's this if you're in your PhD, there's this cynical, and then a rebuttal article about graduate school that was published in like a zoology journal, probably in the 80s or 90s, but it's kind of funny. If you're going to read it, you have to read the rebuttal, which is very cynical. It's like nobody cares about you. And there's a grain of truth to that. So you can always look that up. But before I start, I mean, are there specific questions or issues that you guys have in your mind that you want me to address? Because if this could go in any kind of direction, I'll try and share my experience with you also. Yep.
I'm sort of curious about like the timeline, like you graduate, maybe do a postdoc and then get a job, or you know, what if you do like a teaching position and where you're not doing research and then you look for a faculty position with research, or do a postdoc after that, like the order
we can talk
goes
about
in.
that.
I'm kind of interested about the interdisciplinary aspect and how you kind of decided to take that route, pros and cons, and specializing in.
It's a kind of related question. You were in mechanical engineering. How did you decide to make the switch over to bioengineering or any other field?
Yeah.
Does that matter?
Anything else? Okay, so let's see where we are. Okay, let me just put that up for a second. But just to sort of get started on your questions and hopefully more information will come out through the presentation, I was always interested in biology. I ended up working in a biology lab as an undergraduate, and then I had to decide what kind of graduate school to go to. And it really was by my advisor who was doing simulations of biomechanical musculoskeletal systems, and he was in a mechanical engineering department. I also decided not to go into sort of a more applied science biology degree, which is, I was looking at, but I felt like that having those engineering skills were what I would get out of it that I wouldn't get, and I felt like I could pick up the biology part on the way. And so my thesis was in sort of bioengineering already, but as I got more into it, and I will say, when I was a grad student, I said I'm never going to be a neuroscientist. Like, it was hard, and I have no interest in it. I find these models because I understand them. And the more I got into it, the more interested I became in that, and I do call myself a neuroscientist now. And so then I went into doing a couple different postdocs. So the first postdoc was like a traveling postdoc because I got a fellowship to go abroad to Paris, and I had already lined up my real postdoc. So and that was an issue that sometimes people find it very hard to search for a job in the States when they're abroad. So doing it the abroad thing first is a good idea. And I talked to my advisor, and he's like, "Oh, you could just stay here for another year. You really need to get on that academic track and look for a job." And I said, "Well, I have a postdoc lined up. I'm just putting it off for a year in a good lab, a great lab, and if I just everything got delayed by a year, how big of a deal would it be?" Like, oh, that's not. And then academically, I got a lot out of it because it was an area that I wanted to know about. I didn't necessarily do those kind of experiments, but with good exposure to certain topics work in the biology lab that gave me some street cred when I wanted to actually call myself a neuroscientist, which they still argue. It depends on what conference I go to. They'll be like, "You're a neuroscientist." "No, you're an engineer." So at the biology conferences, they think I'm an engineer. At the engineering conferences, they think I'm a biologist. But you know, I didn't rush through any of my training, and I would recommend that. I know people who have and sort of felt like they would have liked some more time to think about their career, and not once you hit the assistant professor position, you have no time. So I always say that you're training, you're building intellectual capital, and then when you get your job, you're just learning it. Like, because you have 5 years ago, and you're supposed to make right? So if you don't know what it is, then can't waste a couple of years figuring out what that is. And then the other advice that I have is for if you know, so I'm going to do bioengineering, and I was at a mechanical engineering degree. If I want to be here in my research, then I want to go do a postdoc that's sort of a little bit beyond that, so that I can sort of have this pedestal for putting on, creating a new space, creating a new field that's interdisciplinary, that's a niche that nobody else can fill. And I'm in a pretty fortunate situation where I think there's a lot of people interested in my work that do like I do, but not exactly. So I have very little fear of getting sued. Because I have sort of created a space that very few people can directly compete with what we're doing. And I personally like it better that way. And it's worked, certainly worked for me. And I always wanted, so how many of you actually think you want to go into academia? That's good. That's good. That's a lot. I mean, I presume that's why you're here. But I definitely decided, like as an undergrad, that I wanted to be in academia. Although at first I didn't, and mostly because my dad was a professor. So I was like, I don't want to do anything that has anything to do with what my dad does. I actually was very active in Society for Women Engineers and met a lot of people in the industry, and then I decided, no, I kind of can't really deal with bosses very well. And got into a great lab. So, but I will say when I got through my grad school experience was different in terms of I didn't feel like I had as much confidence and networking, and I just wasn't sure. And I think that's completely normal. So everyone's going to go through those times when you're like, I don't know, I do this, I hate my project, I don't want to ever see this again. And so that shouldn't necessarily be a sign that you don't want to go into academia. And also, I have students who look at me in my life and they're like, I don't want to do it. And I said, but the way I'm doing it is not the only way I have this job. I kind of have a short attention span. I like to have lots of projects, and all of that misery is my own. So I don't have to be interested in as many things, and I think it's very important to start to just sort of target, be focused. But I can only do that for so long. So I have a pretty diverse group of students and projects, but you don't have to put it that way. And as you go, there's other opportunities that you can't imagine. So, like, I went to India to teach neuroscience to Tibetan monks. Was I going to say no to that? No. But it puts pressure on, the time I have for my lab. So, anyway, so the first slide here is really like, am I ready for a job? Am I not? And I think personally, when I was a postdoc, I thought it was awesome. And also I was looking at my advisor going, I don't know if I can be responsible for grants and running a lab. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just do this forever and have somebody else deal with that. And, I don't need to make that much money. I didn't necessarily have results yet from my research when I did start applying for jobs, because it takes a while to learn a new field, get some stuff published, and we also had some issues like lab moving and stuff. So, and I then also heard at the time, so that people say that, oh, well, now you have to have your own grant first before you get a faculty position. 20 years ago when I was doing this, they said the same thing. So people think that's the new thing, and no, the funding was terrible in the 90s, and that was also what was said. It was like, oh, it's so terrible now. So I didn't have funding of my own. I did have a fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship. I couldn't tell you exactly what I wanted to do. I definitely have a theme, but I think you have to get to the point where you can be very focused and say, well, I'm going to write a grant on this. And maybe there aren't, everyone says that jobs are disappearing, and it's all cyclical, and I think that if you're passionate about what you're doing, that's the most important thing. And sometimes you don't know what that feels like, because it's frustrating also. I would say the way that it happened to me was that I was working in a lab, and I didn't have time. I said, well, I want to add this modeling component in this biology lab, and so my advisor was very gracious and got me software, and I did not have time to do it. And so I was like jotting down notes, and I said, I just had somebody, I know what I need to do. Someone just needs to write this code and do this, but I don't have time to do it. And so a couple of different things popped up like that. And I would say when you're at that stage, yeah, you're ready for a lab. When there's like so many ideas that you need to know the answer to them. Because that's the kind of passion that you need to get through, all setting up a lab, training students, and getting a job. And it definitely happens, and it happens at different times for different people. So I've seen it happen to a lot of people, and sometimes it's just like a light switch. Like working on stuff, and all of a sudden, like, you know what I really need, and nobody's done this, I need this, this, and this. And that's the point at which you're definitely ready. I was sort of like, oh, maybe I don't want to go into academia. But I got to my dream job came, like the announcement came up to go to Berkeley and actually be in the biology department, which is where I did my research. And I knew the people who had left there, and so they're in my field, and so all the equipment was there. And I literally was like, yeah, maybe I'll just put this off. But then this came up, and I just said, I will never forgive myself if I don't just try. Here's yet these jobs don't come up in the place you want, very frequently. So I have to at least try, and if I don't get it, fine. But if there was some chance, and then later some doubt in my mind that I didn't apply myself when the opportunity came up, then I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I started writing a research statement, and that job search actually the job search at Berkeley was sort of aborted because they had some issues and had done it wrong. But here I was with a job statement, and so I thought about, okay, if there was a couple places out there that I really wanted to go to, where would they be, and I'll apply there. And I had a couple years of fellowship left, so I wasn't in a huge hurry, and I said I'll just apply to places that I really want to go to. And then I said, well, then next year, if this doesn't work out, I'll just sort of do the whole blanket everybody with my application approach. And so that's when I targeted here in Northwestern, and so ended up with a job. So, and that kind of, when I accepted that job, I also said, well, look, my lab moved, I don't have data, I pushed it out for a year. So I said, I'll see you guys in a year. They wanted me to start that fall, and I'm like, I can't do it, and here's the reasons why you don't want me to do it. Because you need me to have my publications and all this stuff. It was literally during that year where I really honed into exactly what research I wanted to do. And so when I came in, I was like, I know I have burning questions, and I'd given myself for each of those projects 2 weeks to just proof of concept, see if it would work. So I got the simulation sort of half working, and then needed a lot of optimization and refinement, but I had that figure that showed that this is probably a good idea. And that's kind of the stage that it's really good to walk into a job with. And I had permission to take that data with me and to build the simulations, since they weren't, we were collecting data, not simulating things. And that's what I did the first 10 years of my career, which I thought would have been the first 5 years of my career, but everything takes longer. Didn't you think it's going to? Especially with the students involved. So I'll also say this, writing the research statement really kind of helped me realize that my path had been pretty coherent. And then even if it's not, I think there's always like a way to show your breadth and show how you got from one place to the next. So yeah, so I think most of it's just that motivation you guys made. The rest of it. So figuring out, okay, what kind of job do you want? And not all places are like Georgia Tech. And things run very, very differently in different places. And that's why I always tell students, don't judge it on my life, because we're at this sort of research intensive and with teaching kind of institute, and the balance goes from one to the other. So people can choose what that is, although for a lot of sort of teaching focused institutions, there's a lot more emphasis on research now. And sometimes it's realistic and sometimes it's not realistic. And that will depend on the kind of resources you're willing to dedicate and the time you're willing to give people to kind of do both. We're on the lower but not low end of teaching here. And it's always good. I mean, I think I don't think I wanted to teach, but I also was at a research institution for my postdoc, and because I like interacting with a lot of people, I couldn't deal with it. So I like having people around, and that's also something that's really different, I think, from like my grad school experience. Even though I was at a university, so a lot of time like working alone in my cubicle, and so I find that the grad school experience is extremely different from my life as a faculty member, which is much more like when I was an undergrad and running around to different classes all the time and doing research and multitasking. I feel like grad schools and postdoc is very like single-minded, focused, and I'm not necessarily the best person to do that, which is another reason that sort of was somewhat frustrating for me to be in that position. So I would say I definitely like it better running a lab and having a lot of people to talk to and work with all the time, and other people might have a different focus. But it's just that you're not necessarily getting trained in the skills that would make you a good lab director. You're definitely getting trained in skills that you need to show yourself as a researcher. But there's tons of other things that you need to consider in terms of going into an academic job. And for me, that difference between undergrad and grad was very, very distinct, and I felt like I had to be focused on the same thing for 8 hours a day, and I don't do that very well. So big or small institution, I definitely was research oriented, and I had never taught anything before I came. So the timeline, there are these seasons for usually applications go in the fall, and people do interviews in the spring, but there are sometimes job searches that go in different timing, but there's definitely a season. I would advocate starting at least 2 years before you think you want to start, because that gives you a couple like a practice year and then a get serious year for applying. And yeah, so these things take a long time once you get to academia. It took them here and like 6 months before they decided they want to hire me after I initially initiated, or maybe closer to 6 to 9 months. And that's because faculty have to decide, and they're not good at getting together and deciding anything. And there's usually debates about what areas and candidates, and so hiring takes a really long time. And then again, the focused versus shotgun approach. I started with the focused approach because having good colleagues and resources is really important. And I knew I could probably get a job in a mechanical engineering department as a backup because there are no women in mechanical engineering departments. So I was like, that's my backup approach. I think I can get a job in ME, you know, most places. But where do I want to be? We're in a place where it's going to really help my career, and I'm going to have fun, cool people to work with and good students. So you can be, and you know, the truth is, when you start in a place, once you do that, it's pretty hard to move. So if you want to start establishing a lab, and then a few years later decide to move, that's a pretty tough proposition then compared to we postdoc for another year and find a job that I really want. So it's a huge investment for you and for the university to have you start in a position. So then you have to figure out what, you know, present yourself in a research statement. It's a really important part of the process. And I think it's a good way to think about how you're going to present yourself, package yourself, and show your qualifications and like your vision for what you want to do. And so it's important to remember that you guys have been writing for extremely specialized journals and conferences, and now you have to make an application to a department electrical engineering. Okay. There's like 100 faculty here in electrical engineering. And, you may have to appeal to one of the sub areas, but that's still pretty broad. And so all the writing, you have to sort of turn around, learn a new style of writing, I think, in terms of talking to a lay scientific trained Ph.D. audience. It's not in your field, but convincing them that you do something important and interesting and that you've been successful and that you have some kind of vision for it. So, so it's not a scientific document so much as like it is really you're marketing yourself. And it's not by getting really technical that it's going to happen. You're going to have to show some proficiency, but that technical part is in your publications. They're all going to have really specific technical titles. And me, I'm looking at somebody doing, I don't know, for whatever, something I don't know about, and I'm like, oh, that's great, I don't know really if this is cutting edge or where it's going or not, and you really have to spell that out for people. So like, for instance, there was a candidate who came and lots of big words, and I said, more on the chemistry side, I said, okay, I've been in chemistry since high school, so you're going to have to just explain to me what you do, and all these words came out, and I was like, and then it was like, oh, okay, you're trying to make a cure for people, you know, gastro. Oh, okay, so why didn't you just say that? Like, just tell me the broad relevance, and then get into it. So it's not quite the talk you give to your grandmother, but it's not that far from it either. And then the other thing is that you have to think about it in terms of somebody else is going to read your research statement, and they're going to say, I really want this person, and they're going to have to go to a committee and explain to everyone why they want this person. So if the document's written away where it's very easy to see what you're going to do, what you've done, that they can actually just read off of it, that's really important. And this is good advice for writing grants too. You just want to put words in the mouth of anyone who could be your potential supporter. Because otherwise, and this has happened before too, where I was like, oh, a person like this, I would say this person could collaborate with so-and-so, they could develop a method can really be developed towards something else that I think is important. And that may be true, and the committee say that's true, but does that person know that? Does the applicant know that? I may be able to see it, but unless the applicant also sees it and also thinks that's important, then I'm just putting words in their mouth, right? So if you say that, then that's much stronger, right? So we've definitely had that question before. I'm like, well, sure, it could be, but is that what they want to do? Is that what they think is important? Yeah. So, and so you're going to summarize research accomplishments. It's a very high level, and then give sort of a 5-year plan of, okay, 5-year plan. Here's my first grant, and here's the first few publications I tend to have, and then that's not enough, but what that shows is that I have enough right now of a research program that I could establish myself and identity for myself in the research world and get tenure. That's what the 5-year plan is about, right? What can you accomplish in 5 years? Do you know what it is? You know, all the questions like, who are you going to be in 5 years that I can present to the president and say, we want to keep that. That's not enough, because then that has to open up sort of a longer career trajectory. So I'm going to solve this problem, it'll be done in 5 years, but then that's not what you want. Either you want to be creating research directions that will sustain a whole career, but the reality is you have 5 years to prove yourself. So you're making a name for yourself. So I have a whole other document. I'm writing a research statement, so you can read it. But you know, it's the opposite of how we learned. You have to talk about yourself. I have a lot of trainees, postdocs, and students have a really hard time with this. You have to say how great you are. And I struggled with this. It's good to try and write it for somebody else. Either pretend like you're somebody else, or like say, well, what would I write for my, grad students that's next to me, like that they've done all these cool things and they're perfect, they have all these skills, and then turn around and sort of you have to step outside of yourself and look at yourself the way somebody else would. They're not going to know a lot of the things that you think are obvious about you. I always say that the way you write the research statement is completely the opposite of how you write an abstract for a conference. I actually just want to start with the impact. Whatever you write at the end, and this is going to, whatever, robotics, health, our understanding of materials, then you put that at the beginning. Say, I have identified X that advances our understanding of Y. The details about how you do it and all that don't matter. It's your understanding of that you've done. You have independently done something that nobody else has done, and you can tell me why it's important. And they can read my paper. They can read your paper if they want to know the details of it. You can explain it broadly, but you're not going to tell them that exactly what you've done, but what you have brought to the research. And then sort of the importance of that in a broader sense again for your research. Now I said 62 pages, and I've now seen 3- and 4-page presentations with beautiful diagrams and stuff like that. Just remember, a faculty member who has so much time and probably 50 other applications is going to. So a thing that I would add here is in your projects to what's big right now is adding in what research funding agencies you think would be appropriate for funding your research. It shows that you have some knowledge of the sort of landscape of funding and that you have projects. So like for my department, it's very important that you have NIH fundable projects, and not all projects are fundable. And it also takes a certain training, so then if it is NIH fundable, have you worked in a lab that's had NIH funding? It's going to be different than SF or DoD. So you want to make sure that you know who'll fund your work, and that you know something about how to get funding. Right, so this is what I was saying. If you have an abstract, you're going to just change the way you do it, put the impact at the end, and forget about all of the methodological details. And you have to say that it's innovative and novel. if it is, and if it's not, don't. You have to think hard about what aspects are and what aspects are not. So people want to look for that word, but you also don't want to. People generally don't, especially when you've been working on something for 5 years. It kind of loses its sparkle. Sometimes it's hard to see that that's new. So, definitely, I read my papers like 3-4 years after, for my Ph.D., 3-4 years after I did it, after I was like, I don't want to do that again. And I read them and I was like, oh, those are pretty good. So you may not have the best perspective, and again, so it might be good to talk to someone else and ask them, why do you think this is important? What do you think is cool about this? Teaching statements. Like I said, I didn't really have much teaching experience, and I don't think I had to actually write a teaching statement. Like if you come interview in mechanical engineering here, they'll make you teach a class, but pretty much you have to not screw it up. Get off the table. But the teaching is important, but for a place like this, it's not going to get you the job. You're going to get the job based on your research and your ability to develop an independent, cognitive program. But you also, people want to know that you're a team player, a good person who's going to contribute to the department in teaching, things like that. So it's really great if you like teaching, but it won't get you a research job. It will, if that's what you're interested in, then you need to look at a more research, teaching-focused institution, in which case you'll probably be teaching like 4 classes a semester, which is a lot, and so there's not a lot of time for research. You kind of be a superhero to get the research done as well. But there's lots of different sort of teaching experience that you can highlight, especially if you've mentored undergraduates or have like defined things like that. It's maybe not formal teaching, formal classroom teaching, but there's a lot more ways now to get experience in teaching, and I think that it is important to have some exposure to that and to think about there's a lot of new techniques now in terms of not lecturing, different approaches to projects that are also really important. Plus, any kind of organizational stuff like team things can also go into your teaching statements. If you like started seminars or these, that counts. Yeah. So I mean, I did that too. So it was. It just kind of shows that you're interested in interacting with others who don't help you learn. So recommendation letters, you need anywhere from 3 to 5 recommendation letters. You need to talk to the people and make sure they're going to give you. So you don't say, will you write me a recommendation letter? Will you write me a strong recommendation letter? Is there people, like even undergrads, like, well, I can write you a letter, but I'm not sure how strong. So you want to seek out the ones who be strong and maybe help your recommenders by saying, an updated CV and sort of maybe summarizing certain accomplishments and things that you would like them to know about and potentially highlight in their letter. So you're going to go with the collaborators. That's always really good. Obviously, your advisor. So I mean, your postdoc can now get 2 letters. And yeah, so that's also a good reason to like get outside of your lab. If you're highly involved with someone on your committee in terms of doing your research, that's also a good person as well. But it really needs to be someone who's going to talk about you as a potential independent investigator in the field. So someone has to have pretty good understanding of your research and your research potential. And sometimes it could be someone who's like just somebody else you know at another conferences or whatever, who's maybe a faculty member who's following your work, who's excited about it. I've definitely written letters, one or two people like that. But generally, it's someone that you've trained with and is very strong about you. And there's always other circumstances in which people do or don't have to write letters. But it's if you don't have your advisor write one, then that's a big red flag. You're going to need to and these, I will say now, having to write them, they take long. So for every person who I write a faculty recommendation letter, takes me at least 6 to 8 hours to write one. And I'm getting better at it. So, but they're very dense 2 to 3 page letters.
As an undergrad, getting recommendation letters, a lot of times we were told that it would be beneficial if you would kind of create an outline, aka you write the letter and then
yeah, so you can say here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because sometimes people will say, "Why don't you write a draft?"
Yeah, you write it yourself and then let them embellish it and sign it. It's basically kind of what.
Well,
I don't know how different.
I get a draft and it's very helpful. Also, because I'll just see, I have my thing. Well, I made this sort of incremental advance and no, I'm not saying that. But it gets me to see allows me to see what you think your contributions are and what you forgot to say. Like, well, you forgot this whole other thing that you did and this whole project that you went to your undergraduate, published a paper. It's a good starting point, but I modify it heavily.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know what they want to do. You probably don't. And you probably, forgotten about things and but it's a good thing to try and maybe talk to someone about it. Because that's probably, if you're writing a letter like that, you're probably doing the same thing in your research teams.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is important. So there's lots of lists. This is old, so I get one from academic PhDs or something about every engineering job. I did it all the time. There's a ton of them. And it's nice to see the different positions in engineering, but if you do the scattershot approach, it's usually not that useful. Although if you have your stuff written, you might as well just send it. But that's not the most effective way. Talking to people is the most important thing that you can do for getting a job. A lot of times. So sometimes when people make announcements, it's like, oh, we have this person we want to hire, but human resources is making this posted, but they really know who they want, and so you can apply, and it looks great for them to have good applicants. Don't get your hopes up, right? So sometimes there's job announcements and they don't know what field they want it in, and sometimes they're very specific about what field they're in. You can see these things, and usually Georgia Tech hiring is a little bit odd, and then it's pretty open for most of the departments because they're large. Kind of take the best player, but most of the time people say we want a person who does this very specific. And so you may be very good, and you may not fill the niche that they want you to fill. So it's not really, most of hiring is not about you. It's about a fit, and timing, and availability in specific places. So if you don't get a job, it doesn't mean you're not qualified. if you know people are retiring too, that's always really an opportunity. I've sent unsolicited applications to departments I really want to work in, but it helps that you know people. And if you've met someone at a conference, talked to them a little bit, that counts. You know them. Call them and say, remember I met you and yeah. So I put this, whoops. I want to really talk about it. And I think this is really the most important thing, because I've seen this not work. So this is my new slide I didn't finish, but it's user network in all of this. So when I applied here, it's like, well, I knew somebody at Emory, I didn't really know anyone at Georgia Tech. And I looked around, I'm like, oh, I knew this guy. He was my TA for my class in graduate school. And, at the time we thought we did things that were worlds apart because he was in orthopedic biomechanics, fellow biomechanics, and our labs didn't talk to each other. And, as you go, you realize, oh, we're all in bioengineering and we know each other. And he's a huge advocate for me in just a contact point for me to say, what's it like there? What are they looking for? Who's in charge? Like, process, and I would call him all the time. And, even though I hadn't talked to him for years, then we connected and got to know each other. And it's really, really important to have somebody watching you. And as I said, if you've met someone, then you know them, and the opportunities of who's around. It could be someone. Oh, I had a class with a person, and we did a project together. And he's in aerospace, and I was in bioengineering. Those people are your advocates. Everybody likes people that they know, especially if they have some experience with them as a person. And I've had it happen that people apply here to Georgia Tech. I know, and they don't tell me. I'm not on every search page. I have appointments in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, bioengineering. I do not read every application that comes through all of those departments. But if you have sent one in, I can go find out, where it is, what people thought of it, maybe provide some other information. But I know we did a search for contributed 400 to 500 applications. They weren't necessarily being read by people in my field who would know about whether this person would be a fit, who they would collaborate with. And by the time I figured it out, where they're like, gosh, I sent this in 6 months ago and I didn't hear anything, that season's over, and it was really too late for me to do anything. So I tried to get it pulled, and I tried to have the chair do it, but now I'm going through extraordinary channels rather than the regular ones. So if you recognize somebody's name, and call them on the phone, because there's a lot of things you are not going to say in email. You just need to have a chat about who goes there, what's it like, and what are they looking for, and do they know? Do you know who's on the search committee? That can help you tailor things as well. And so I also, whoever is the chair of the search committee, should call them here and see what their take on it is. But I've seen this happen through a lot of searches where it's like, oh, I recognize that name, and you start talking. I just always happy about it. And like I said, I've now experienced too many lost applications because people didn't effectively use their network and call people on it. As I said, it's been very surprising to me how broad I've used that number of people that I know or barely know or are an acquaintance. That's better than not knowing anyone at all. So I should wrap up, but yeah, so it's important before you apply that just try and do as much detective work about what the department wants. and how you fit into it. So talking, show as many people as possible your research statement. Let as many people know as possible that you're on the market. Because then it's like, oh, this job's coming up. You know, people tell you who to target. I know that in mechanical engineering here, you know, timing-wise, it is possible now. Sometimes people will hire really good students at a Ph.D. and say, go do a postdoc, and you'll have a job here in 2 years. So that's also a possibility, because it's really hard to get good people who want to. And we have lots of good people we offer them, and then they go somewhere else. So the departments are having a difficult time with finding people who are good match as you are. So it's I'd say it's never too early to like approach people about it. You might not be quite ready to give that job talk presentation yet, but letting people know you're interested is, especially if there's a certain school that you want. It's never too early to kind of see what it's like. So, anyway, that's it. I don't know if I answered all the questions that you guys had. Okay, well, good luck, and I hope you all got, give it a shot in academia. The worst thing that happens is that it's not a good fit, and you tried it, and there's lots of other career paths that are out there. Oh, right, the one question is that it's very difficult to sort of step off the academic path and come back on. It's not impossible, but it's something to consider. I mean, you can, slow things down and stuff. You have to go directly, but, you have to make sure that connected and stay in the publication record. It depends on some of the more engineering. If you're going to engineering, like research and industry, sometimes you can step back in to academia, but if you haven't been publishing in an area that you're not publishing, then it is can be difficult. All right.
Well, with that, I'm sure if you have any personal questions, you may have a few minutes to help answer them. Again, please make sure